Hello, everybody, and welcome to An Unexpected Fight, a pediatric cancer podcast. We have a great episode for you today, and we are super excited about our special guest. Kelly, go ahead and give an introduction.
All right. So this is Dr. Kei Iwamoto. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Kei. So Dr. Kei attended the University of California, Berkeley to earn a double AB degree in physics and biochemistry. He received a PhD degree from the UCLA School of Medicine in Biomedical Physics in the specialty of radiation biology and experimental therapeutic oncology. Dr. Kei then worked at the Radiation Effects Research Foundation in Hiroshima, Japan, as a fellow of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences to study the molecular mechanics of radiation carcinogenesis among the atomic bomb survivors. RERF is a binational research institute funded equally by the governments of Japan and the U.S. Dr. Kei then moved back to the U.S. to accept a faculty position and set up a laboratory in the Division of Molecular and Cellular Oncology of the Department of Radiation Oncology within the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. So it's a very impressive bio, and I can't wait to hear a little bit more about your background.
So to begin, Dr. Kei, just tell us a little bit about how you began your career as a researcher.
All right. Well, thank you very much for having me today. So let me, if you just allow me to stretch back maybe a long time ago to third grade. My teachers and classmates actually used to call me the class comedian, not the class clown. That kind of has a different connotation, but the class comedian. And that's probably because I like making people laugh and just making them happy. And at one point, actually, I was very seriously considering becoming a cartoonist because I also like to draw. And so as a kid, I draw all sorts of things. I write little comic books, and a lot of times I'd have these observational cartoons. Like the time I forced my mom to miss our bus so that I could just sketch this huge tow truck hooking up and towing away this even huger hook and ladder fire truck that stalled in front of our bus stop. And as I was drawing the gauges and the valves and the connections and the handles, the mechanisms behind all these little things started to intrigue me, and I got curious and just to see how they work. So I got interested in just the science behind it and understanding the mechanism. So I did a lot of research on the things that I drew. Like I drew all sorts of things: fire trucks and airplanes and trains and spaceships and stars and galaxies and animals and plants and all sorts of things. One day my aunt and uncle from Seattle visited, and they saw my sort of quote unquote technical drawings, and later on they sent me this book called Tell Me Why, which was sort of a compendium of all sorts of short explanations of everything from physics, engineering, to physiology, to biology. And I just absolutely loved it. And then I got really interested in just following my dad around when he was fixing up the car or the clock or the kitchen or whatever. And so I really got interested in talking with him and problem solving and just trying to cogitate about how to fix things and improve things. And I think because of that, I really got into science projects and research and science fairs and all that during high school. And that's the one real supportive part about that was one teacher, Mrs. Verberg, who started this early morning program that she called Biomed. And it met before the regular classes started. And, basically in her classroom, there was this one old cupboard filled with all these old top-notch scientific journals, like Science and Nature and Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. And she would just tell us, just pick a journal, pick an article, read it, and then think up your own ideas. Maybe you can change that experiment a little. Well, we're just fresh out of middle school and, freshmen in high school. We didn't know what we were doing. And so the go-to thing was, we'll just change the strain of mouse. The article uses C57 black 6 mice. We'll just use C3H mice, or something like that, real simple stuff. But then as we start doing this, we kind of start to understand and develop our own sort of simple hypotheses as how to extend that study. And that's when we started learning and understanding that this is how science works, right? This is what you do. You build upon the work of others, sometimes incrementally, but other times by leaps and bounds. And those leaps and bounds ones are really the really interesting ones, at least to me. And I think it makes big impact in the world. But anyway, so she encouraged us to develop these hypotheses, and then we'd submit them to these competitive programs that she found for us, and just to get funding or opportunities to conduct that research at local colleges and universities. And it was actually very exciting for us because we got to take part in real science at real laboratories with real research scientists, and that and then we're allowed to present our results to our peers and to scientists. So nowadays I try to pay it forward to high schoolers as well as college undergrads by getting them in my lab and to do some similar real science. It's real research.
That's awesome.
Wow.
That.
I hope you reached back out to that teacher and told her how much impact she had on you, because that's a pretty amazing teacher.
Yeah, she was a great teacher. She passed away a few years ago, but yeah.
Well, thank you to her then. So you kind of answered this a little bit, but what has been your journey and career path leading up to your current role? And can you share what initially inspired you to specialize in pediatric cancer research specifically, particularly the radiation field?
Sure. So actually, I can pick up from where I just left off and kind of graduated high school. And then, I was interested in a lot of things, but I decided, what, I'm kind of interested in biomedical research to understand the basics of life and disease. That was kind of a big thing for me. And so I declared this major in biochemistry. And in those days, maybe even these days, I don't know, the thing to do at these icebreakers in the dorms was, what's your what's your major? What's your major? So that was the thing. The first thing you asked, what's your major? After, what's your name? And when I said biochemistry, one of the sophomores, I was a freshman, one of the sophomores kind of brashly blurted out, biochemistry. You'll be poor the rest of your life. You should just go into engineering and start making money and getting a job as soon as you graduate. And so, as a newbie freshman, and kind of be told off by this wise old sophomore, I kind of thought about it. And yeah, I guess he makes a good point. So I decided to change my major to chemical engineering. And so, for chemical engineering, I had to take math for math majors, and physics for physics majors, and chemistry for chemistry majors, and biochemistry for biochemistry majors. And actually, I loved it all. So that was great. I kind of appreciated that sort of admonition by that sophomore. And then I had my first chemical engineering class, and boy, I hated it. I don't know if it was the material or the instructor or what it was, but I hated it. And I went back to my advisor and I asked if I could just switch back to biochemistry. And he looked at my report and record, I guess, and he said, "Well, you've taken all these prerequisites. You can double major if you like. It's something you really want to do." So I picked fairly two separate fundamental sciences, so biochemistry and physics. And so actually I had two fields now that wouldn't get me a job when I graduated, right? but I was happy. It was fine. I enjoyed it. And during my senior year, I was taking a nuclear physics class, and radiation physics really became interesting to me. And I wanted to do something that could combine radiation physics and biology. And the perfect match for that, the perfect discipline actually was radiation biology or radiobiology. And radiobiology is essentially the study of the interaction of radiation with cells, how radiation can change cells for the good or for the bad.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got my PhD in that. And then after my PhD, I went to Hiroshima on a fellowship to study how radiation caused cancer in the A-bomb survivors. And then I come back here to LA, actually, and set up a lab so that I could study how radiation can cause cancer. And then from the opposite perspective, how to use radiation to destroy cancer. And still, after all these years, I really do enjoy thinking, cogitating, trying to fix things, improve therapy, but not only really from a basic scientist's perspective, but also from a clinical perspective. And, to do that, you have to discuss and brainstorm with a lot of other people who have clearly different knowledge bases and experiences and perspectives. And so one day I was talking to a good friend and colleague of mine, Robert Brown, and so he happened to be actually a pediatric oncologist. And he was just lamenting at that time about treating kids with medulloblastoma, which is, one of the most common, or is the most common central nervous system cancer in children. And actually, his real conundrum about that was not being able to use radiation therapy in very young patients to treat leptomeningeal metastases, which is the spreading of the cancer to the skull or the what do you call it? The surface of the brain and the spinal cord.
Spinal fluid.
Right. And so that discussion actually kind of took away some of the cobwebs from this old idea that I'd had, but I could never get traction from the funding agency for this. Probably most likely because I kind of developed it as an adult glioblastoma research study treatment. But after that discussion with Robert, I was just like, wow. I was just really stoked because that idea seemed like it was perfect and just made for treatment of leptomeninges and leptomeningeal metastases in children.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. I love that. It all it's interesting whenever things tie together from whenever you're a child and you grow and change and you find out why you've been interested in this in all these years. So that's really cool.
Yeah. It's fantastic.
So how does radiation therapy differ when treating pediatric cancer patients versus adult patients? You spoke about glioblastoma, which is not common in children, but as Kelly knows, can certainly happen in a child. So tell us a little bit about how the radiation therapy differs from adults and children.
Sure. So I think one of the biggest differences is that pediatric cancer patients' body, tissues, organs are still really in a peak rapid development phase. And radiation can interfere with this process. It's especially true in the brain where the neural circuitry and the networking is just laying down the foundation for all the critical neurological and bodily developments that basically are involved in making a helpless little baby into a capable adult. And from the perspective of treating leptomeningeal metastasis, adults can undergo radiation therapy, but children under 3 cannot because of the way that the radiation has to be delivered. And so for this, I like to use one of my favorite analogies using an episode from Star Trek, the original series. And, both of you have heard me talk about this. But the reason I like it is because this episode just absolutely remarkably mirrors the basic problem with radiotherapy to treat leptomeningeal metastasis in young children. So for any of your listeners who are unfamiliar with Star Trek, it was a TV program back in the 60s that followed the Starship Enterprise of the United Federation of Planets on a 5-year mission to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no one has gone before. I hope that sounds familiar, right?
Yeah.
So in that episode, it's called Operation Annihilate. The Enterprise is tracking the path of mass insanity that has inflicted the Federation colonies on a line of planets in the star system. And Captain Kirk, First Officer Spock, and Chief Medical Officer McCoy transport down to Deneva, the most recently afflicted colony, and they find the population dead, dying, or insane. And they find that there are billions of these gigantic brain cells flying through the air, spreading throughout the surface of the planet, just attaching to everything, all the infrastructure on the surface. And these cells are apparently a part of some gigantic disembodied brain that's attempting to take over the galaxy. So Spock, of course, gets attacked by one of these frisbee-sized brain cells, which takes over his mind so that they can make him commandeer the Enterprise, so that they can transport the next planet to infect. So any commander other than Kirk would easily have stopped the creatures from spreading by just killing Spock and destroying the whole planet using the Enterprise's powerful weapons. But of course, Kirk won't accept killing his first officer, his friend, and of course destroying the planet. And they eventually discover that a certain harmless light is deadly to the creatures. And when they test it on Spock, he recovers. There's actually a little bit more drama with that and Spock, but you'll have to watch the episode. I'm just giving you the trailer version. So basically, it's a good episode.
I'm gonna watch it.
So they douse the entire planet with this light from the orbiting Enterprise, killing only the creatures, preserving everything else, and Deneva is saved. Now, this episode just uncannily introduces the contrasting ideas of treating metastasis of medulloblastoma by current methods and by our proposed method. So, although medulloblastomas are relatively easily killed by radiation, there are two major issues that make it difficult to manage. So, in conventional radiotherapy, you have a machine that rotates around the patient about a yard away, shoots this beam of X-rays very precisely to target only the tumor, not unlike the Enterprise orbiting the planet. And for precision targeting, the tumor needs to be at least a quarter inch in diameter larger. It really can't target individual cells or small clusters of cells without really endangering a lot of normal cells. So issue number one, you can think of the brain and the spinal cord shrink wrapped in a thin membrane called the leptomeninges, and it's bathed in this liquid called cerebrospinal fluid. And all that is fitted into a protective case of bone that, of course, familiar we call skull and spine. And so you can visualize it as a well-packaged unit. And early during the progression of medulloblastoma, billions of these malignant cells flow into the cerebrospinal fluid and attach throughout the outside of the leptomeninges. But really, the brain and spinal cord are untouched because of this wrapping barrier. Just like on Star Trek with the alien cells, only on the surface of the planet. So the radiation oncologist is forced to irradiate everything, the whole central nervous system, just to be able to dose this expansive surface and cerebrospinal fluid of this unit that I just described. And this is very ironic because, in general, the big advantage of radiotherapy is that it's a localized method of tumor treatment to avoid to be able to avoid as much of the normal tissues as possible. But in this case, probably more normal tissue than tumor tissue is irradiated, kind of like in the non-Kirk solution to destroy all the aliens in the atmosphere and on the surface of the planet by destroying the whole planet. And then this leads to the second issue number two. And the whole brain and spine are now exposed to the same radiation dose as to the medulloblastoma cells. And that dose is 36 gray. And 36 gray in very young patients leads to neurocognitive problems later on. And that's why patients under 3 years old do not undergo radiotherapy until they're older. And unfortunately, that delay increases the risk of recurrence and more aggressive treatment later.
Absolutely. Thank you for explaining that. So Tiffany and I met Dr. Kei at the National Pediatric Cancer Foundation's Research Summit, and he explained this. And of course, as two brain tumor moms, we were both honed in on this. Like, this is amazing research, and we need to know more. So let me go back. We know Dr. Kei because in 2022, NPCF launched a $4.3 million grant program called the 43 Challenge to encourage proposals for research that can improve the lives of children with cancer. Dr. Kei was one of our winners of the 43 Challenge, and he found this amazing way to change the way radiation is administered to cancer patients with the goal of eliminating even the most difficult of tumors. So thank you for that explanation, and congratulations, by the way. I did not have say in who won that 43 challenge, so I am biased, and I'm happy you won, but I did not have say. I'll just make it clear that my bias was not part of it. But I can see why we invested so much in this, because I really do think this could change the way cancer treatment is for young children, especially in the brain tumor world. And that speaks very closely to Tiffany and I, obviously.
Yes, having a child that passed away from leptomeningeal disease and couldn't have radiation, this could make a significant impact in not only medulla, but all of these brain tumors and other tumors in the pediatric cancer space that have to deal with this type of spread within their disease. So we see the benefit for so many children with your research. So how did you find out about this 43 challenge from NPCF?
Well, I was getting quite frustrated and discouraged with the major governmental funding agencies like the NIH, National Institutes of Health. That, ironically, they were saying this proposal was just too innovative and these ideas are just not yet accepted in the mainstream. And, that's the nature of a lot of government funding. You have to be doing mainstream science. And, by definition, that means it's been done, and then the funding is to tweak it for incremental advances rather than by leaps and bounds, as I had mentioned earlier. So I was really looking for opportunities in pediatric cancers through other routes, and that's when the NPCF came up in my searches. And I'm really indebted to the NPCF for going beyond mainstream and taking the risk on this project. And I'm really, really sanguine about this new method to treat medulloblastoma in kids. And I really think this is a leaps and bounds research project.
Absolutely. All right. Well, you kind of told us about how this new radiation works a little bit. So I'm going to combine a couple questions here. Can you tell us a little more detail about the mechanism of how it works in comparison between like photon and proton radiation? So if you can kind of give an idea of what photon and proton is, and then what your new treatment looks like and how that differs.
Okay. Well, first of all, my lab is a quantum radiobiology lab. And what basically we do is kind of the marriage of quantum physics and radiation biology. And I sort of explained already what radiobiology is. It's the understanding of how radiation affects cells. But what about quantum physics? What pray tell is that? And I'm sure everyone has at least heard of quantum physics, or maybe quantum mechanics, sometimes it's called. But beyond that, who really cares, right? I mean, what's the big deal? It's one of those subjects you might take in college if you're crazy, some people might say. But does it even matter in the real world? I would say yes and no. So most of us can go through life, never, ever have to think or worry about quantum physics. But it's absolutely making the world work. And if we can exploit it, we can improve the world. So, for example, the sun shines, makes possible all life on Earth, right? All that sunshine warms up the world and fuels the transformation of two very simple inorganic molecules, water, H2O, and carbon dioxide, CO2. And it turns it into a very complex organic molecule, sugar, through the process that we know as photosynthesis. And that leads to the creation of the whole food chain, right? So, really, literally, the entire planet, the life on the entire planet, is based on the sunshine. And that sunshine is produced through thermonuclear fusion at the core of the sun, right? So what it does is it brings two hydrogen nuclei, squeezes them together, and fuses them into a helium nucleus. And when that happens, it produces a lot of energy. Now, this process should not work at all according to classical Newtonian physics, but it can only be explained by quantum physics. And this knowledge of quantum physics is then what allows scientists to try and make energy production by fusion a reality, right? So that we would have endless supply of clean energy. So technically, this little story is an example of quantum radiobiology because it brings together the quantum physics of fusion radiation with life on Earth. And actually, even the photosynthetic process can only be completely explained by quantum physical principles. So actually, it's kind of very appropriate, at least from my perspective, that the NPCF has the Sunshine Project. Okay, so how do we translate this to cancer treatments? Again, quantum physics tells us what the true laws of physics are at the molecular or atomic level. So when radiation therapists irradiate a patient's tumor, the radiation causes a bunch of electrons from the molecules within the cell to dance around to create new chemical reactions. In our research, we use our knowledge of the quantum physical behavior of these dancing electrons to favor cancer cell death over normal cell death. So we literally change the way the electrons dance with each other, kind of like callers at a square dance telling dancers to change partners. When electrons dance with different partners, they alter the outcome of the cell's fates. So using this technique, we can preferentially target most of the radiation energy to the cerebral spinal fluid and to the leptomeninges, no matter how convoluted or expansive that volume is. Now remember that convolutedness and that expansiveness of the volume that the tumor cells spread in the central nervous system is what forces the radiation therapist to have to radiate the whole central nervous system, right? So to go back to that Star Trek episode, the current standard of care method that basically discourages radiotherapy of young medulloblastoma patients is the ordinary captain's method of destroying the whole planet just to kill the alien cells on the surface, versus our proposed new quantum radiobiology technique is akin to Captain Kirk's solution of targeting only the surface of the planet without harming all the normal planetary infrastructure and creatures living on and below the surface. So to help you visualize that, let me give you another analogy. This is not Star Trek, but it's just another analogy. Do either of you or anyone use a smoker to smoke meat?
My husband
Yeah.
loves it.
Yeah, I was going to say, husband.
Yeah. So basically, it's a big grill with a lid, and you throw some damp wood chips on the hot charcoals, and you create a whole lot of smoke, right? And you place this big hunk of some irregularly shaped pork or beef on the grill. You close the lid and you let the smoke permeate the whole chamber. And after a few to several hours, your meat's done. And when you slice open that meat, you'll see a very thin smoke ring, right? It'll be evenly distributed along the outside perimeter, no matter how convoluted or large that meat may be. But deeper inside, deeper inside that meat, there is some smoke flavor, but no discoloration like the smoke ring, right? So you can think of that smoky air around the meat as the cerebral spinal fluid, and the smoke ring as the leptomeninges, and the pinkish inside is the normal brain and spinal cord. So most of that smoke, or you can think of it as the radiation energy in the therapy, is on the outside and surface where the metastatic tumors are. So our technique is like Star Trek or smoking a hunk of meat. Take your pick. So we've been able to show then that using this quantum technique, we can selectively increase the radiation only to the cerebral spinal fluid and the leptomeninges, where the metastatic tumor cells are, by a factor of 5 or 6 compared to the normal deeper brain and spinal cord tissues. Now, from a radiotherapy perspective, that's a phenomenal amount of radiation dose enhancement. So, radiation dose is defined as the amount of energy that's absorbed in the cells. So, the more energy, the more damage. So, for the same amount of radiation, dose enhancement causes more of the energy to be absorbed. Right? So, most radiation dose enhancement techniques are measured something in the tens of percent, like 10% dose enhancement or 20% dose enhancement. But, we can do something like 500 or 600%. So that's phenomenal. And then you ask, what does that mean practically? All right. Well, going back to the current standard treatment, remember I said that 36 gray is necessary to kill the tumor cells. So that basically forces the radiotherapist to irradiate the whole central nervous system with 36 gray. Right. Now with this technique, with our technique, the radiotherapist would still irradiate the whole central nervous system, but with only 1/6 the dose, or 6 gray. And so that exposes the normal brain and normal spinal cord to only 6 gray, which should not be a problem for neurocognitive development at all. But the convoluted, expansive volume that's conventionally difficult to target and that contains the spreading tumor cells exclusively then gets that dose enhanced 36 gray, right? The dose needed to kill the cancer cells. So this is no brainer. And there's some pun intended there. And that really excites me. And I think it's a huge game changer.
Well, I'll
Absolutely.
say
And
whenever I first heard you speak at Summit this year, so this was my first summit to be at. I just joined NPCF in
uh-huh.
November of last year. And so Summit was totally new to me. I didn't know anything about any of the research trials that we had been doing. You got up there and talk. I was like, this man's going to win a Nobel Prize for this research. I'm telling you, like, this is cutting edge, like will change the game not only of pediatric cancer but adult cancers too. I think that what you are studying, what you're onto is just groundbreaking, and I am so excited to see all the advancements that you make. So where are you at with your research right now? Are there any updates that you've got? And research, typically when someone thinks of it, it's phase 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I guess just kind of explain like where you're at with your research and what you need going forward and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so we're preclinical, and so not even at phase one. Right? Phase one is just studying for safety. So we're still at preclinical, and we've been doing a lot of cell work, and that's where we got this whole measure of 5 to 6 times, a factor of 5 to 6 times. The dose enhanced with 600 to 500 to 600%, and we're still working with cells, mostly in vitro work with cells, and then we're starting up some animal work. And with animals, we're basically going to create a model of medulloblastoma and medulloblastoma spread, the leptomeningeal spread, so that we can actually do this in vivo to test and truly see what that dose enhancement is going to be.
Incredible. How long of a process do you expect that? And I know that's a really hard question to answer, but how far out do you expect to really start going into where we're doing human trials on this?
I hope it's quick. I hope it's quick. On average, whatever the technology is or the drug, it, it takes about 17 years from bench to actual clinical practice. And I hope this technique goes a lot faster than that. But you never know. You never know.
Very
There's a
true.
lot of hoops to go through, both scientific and administrative, and bureaucratic. So I don't know.
Absolutely. All right, well, let's
You
go ahead and.
say that.
Oh,
Oh,
go
go ahead,
ahead.
Kelly.
No,
No, I
you
was going
go.
to say, would you say, you talked a little bit about having difficulty with the NIH picking up your idea earlier. Would you say that the foundation helping fund this part of your research cut off any of that 17-year time frame that typically takes for research to make it to practice?
Absolutely, absolutely. Not only that, but I think it helps to give us confidence about there's somebody out there who believes in us and allows us to have the freedom to be able to do things that you know are very important to improve the lives of a lot of people out there. So absolutely, the foundation has really, really helped in many ways beyond what I can really describe.
What advice would you give to young researchers or medical students that are interested in pursuing a career in pediatric oncology and radiation therapy? Because we know this is a difficult field, and whenever anybody gets into it, my question is why? That's such a difficult field, but those who are involved are very passionate about what they're doing. So why? What advice would you give them?
Well, I think it's one of the noblest endeavors to try and improve the well-being of really science, society's greatest future asset. That's children. And so, I think, and radiation oncology is very unique among the disciplines in medicine in that it's probably the first one that truly was interdisciplinary. Right? It brings together physics and chemistry and biology. And you need all that, right? You need all these different disciplines together with medicine to really synergize and improve patient care. I mean, as soon as Röntgen discovered X-rays at the end of 1895, by April of the next year, 1896, there are biologists and physicians and all sorts of people just testing them out. And even electrotherapists got into the act because, back then, anyone could buy an X-ray tube, basically kind of mail order. I've seen some very old newspaper clippings of advertisements for X-ray tubes, and especially with electrotherapists, shock therapy was a very popular, I guess, treatment back in those days, and so these electrotherapists already had the high voltage setups, so they could just buy a tube and start producing radiation. So there's been a long tradition of interdisciplinary collaborations, and the whole field blossomed, um, putting all these diverse fields together, producing a fantastic melting pot of ideas that can feed off of each other. So again, it's traditionally very interdisciplinary um, field, and I think it's a great area to work in, I think. And it brings together, in my case, a lot of quantum physics and biology. But it's really a big mix of all sorts of interesting fields. And so I think it would be a great field to go into for these people. And just to kind of I think I forgot to answer your question about photon and proton. I
I was
didn't.
going to go back to that. I was thinking about it, but
Okay. Well, if you don't mind, I'll just go back to that then.
yeah,
All right.
absolutely.
So the difference between a photon and a proton, right? So again, these are very different entities that develop through the physics. So a photon is what makes up light, and it's massless, no mass. And its energy defines what we call it colloquially, right? So, for example, visible light, UV light, infrared light, radio waves, microwaves, all these are made up of photons, but of different energies. Okay, so X-rays are also photons. They're made up of photons, but with so much energy that they can cause the dancing electrons, as I mentioned earlier. So, in fact, one of the tenets of quantum physics is that light behaves as waves. So we always kind of think of light as waves, light waves, right? But the quantum physics says that light behaves as waves and as particles of matter or photons. And so that's where photons come from. And this photon nature is referred to as a quantum. Right? So a photon is a quantum of light. And from that comes the name of quantum physics. And the whole thing is really the essence of quantum physics. And it leads to a lot of cool, non intuitive ideas, but I don't really have time to discuss that now. Now, protons are massive subatomic particles. So they have a mass. Okay, so they have a mass. And in fact, a proton is the nucleus of hydrogen atom, right? The simplest element. Mm-hmm. And the number of protons in a nucleus defines that element, right? So hydrogen has one proton. And like in the core of the sun example, when you fuse these two hydrogen atoms together, basically you're fusing two protons together, you get helium, right? So two protons, helium, three protons, lithium, four protons, beryllium, five boron, six carbon, so on and so forth. And photons and protons interact in the body very differently, right? So both of them will generate the dancing electrons that I spoke about earlier, but they do travel in the body very differently. So photons continuously lose energy as they go deeper and deeper into the body. Okay. Whereas protons lose less energy during their travel through the body until they begin to significantly slow down and eventually stop, where they actually lose all their energy. Right. So another analogy here. To help you visualize this difference, just think of a football field with a crop of corn growing on the gridiron. Okay, so first you get some skinny high school kid, full of energy, wanting to run through the 100 yards to the end zone. And he's a fun-loving, mischievous guy, so he's purposely going to start knocking over corn stalks and punching off ears of corn on his way to the end zone. But by the end, he's really tired. He expended too much energy in the beginning. And if you look at his trail through the cornfield, you're going to see a lot of damage, right? Initially, a lot more than towards the end. Okay, so he's like a photon. Okay, now you compare that with an NFL running back. You tell him he makes it to the end zone through the cornfield, and he will win it all for the team. So he's going to powerfully, skillfully, efficiently run through that obstacle of stalks without really damaging much of the stalks nor the ears of corn like the high schooler. But when he reaches that goal, when he reaches that end zone, he's going to be super excited. He's going to slam the football into the turf. He's going to do his high energy dance there, and then he's going to be damaging a whole lot of the corn stalks and ears, right? So he's a proton. Okay, so you can actually direct the protons to stop at any given depth, right? Mm-hmm. Say at the tumor. And so that's what makes protons so exciting to a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And the thing with that is, um, so I guess to compare our radiation technology with proton radiation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, our treatment methods basically uses photons, X-rays, but in a very novel way to achieve this exquisite tumor targeting that would conventionally be difficult to target, right? Now, proton therapy really can't do that and be used to target such an expansive, difficult to define target
It's more focused on one
because
small area.
right,
Right.
exactly. So exactly, you know exactly well. So the proton is for very precise, well-defined volume irradiations.
Mm-hmm.
So again, getting to that smoke analogy, right? So our technique would be kind of the smoking method, right? Getting everything everywhere, no matter how convoluted that volume is and how big it is, how expansive it is, right? And whereas the proton therapy would be more like using, a thin flame of a blowtorch to try and get all these parts on that surface, but it's going to be hard. And I guess the other difference is that protons require a huge infrastructure to produce and direct the proton beam because, as I said earlier, protons have mass. They're massive particles. So you need a lot of energy and power to manipulate them to the way that you want. Whereas, getting back to that question that you had earlier, on the other hand, our technique really implements all the stuff that's already available in the clinic and is actually just used in a very novel way. We use it in a very different way than it's usually used in the clinic. So really all the material and all the procedures are available. And so this is why I think it might be a little bit more rapid than the 17 hours I quoted earlier about getting from bench to clinic.
Right. Absolutely. I could listen to your analogies all day, by the way. I feel as if I've had many families ask me from a health navigator standpoint the difference between proton and photon radiation. And I've explained it in the best way I can, but I love your analogies and I'm going to steal them if that's okay. Because I'm picturing the football
Please.
players running through the cornfields. I could listen to Dr. Kai and his analogies all day, I think.
I absolutely agree. I mean, even working in oncology myself, I don't work in radiation oncology, so some of the in-depth terminology gets lost on me, but your analogies make it very easy to understand and picture. So I really appreciate those, and I am sure our audience does as well. So this may be a little bit of a strange question, but for the general public and our listeners, is there any way to support your pediatric cancer research initiatives that you have, or any research or any research that you may be doing aside from what we've been discussing here today?
Yeah, I've thought about this before, and it's a difficult question, where it's a complex question, it's a complex answer, and I don't, what I might say. I guess my short answer would be, I think your listeners, who I imagine are likely to be empathetic and knowledgeable about pediatric cancer, maybe can help to spread the word about the gravity. Really, I think this is the key word here, the gravity of childhood cancers to the general public, who are likely to be more sympathetic and less knowledgeable about pediatric cancers. Now, just to elaborate on that, so cancer in general is an old person's disease, meaning that the incidence of disease really goes up exponentially with age. And depending on the type of cancer and the model that you might use to calculate it, the risk goes up something like, for the fourth or the fifth or the sixth power to age, right? So, and if you look at the actuarial data over the years, deaths from cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cancer have all skyrocketed since the early 20th century. And this actually happens to coincide with the discovery and the routine use of antibiotics. Now, infections were really a leading cause of death, especially in younger people, until antibiotics came to the rescue. And then many people lived longer, and that led to this increase in the old people's diseases, right? Like heart disease and type 2 diabetes and cancer. So, in terms of the total percentage of cancers, pediatric cancers are really minor. But that does not diminish by any means the importance of curing pediatric cancer. In fact, on the contrary, I think the first thing that the general public should be made aware of is the critical nature of treating children. Again, to repeat myself, children are the future of our society. And the potential number of productive years of life is hugely larger than that of a senior. Okay, so but I'm not diminishing the importance of cancer treatment in older people. No, no, don't get me wrong there. But what I'm saying is that the public should be made aware of the fact that research funding for pediatric cancer pales in comparison to non-pediatric cancer research. And I think it's a reflection of that total incidence that I talked about, right? Mm-hmm. So really something like 3 to 4% of the NIH budget for cancer research goes to pediatric cancer. And everyone knows someone old who's had cancer, but very few people actually know a child who's had cancer. And so, in one sense, I guess that's good because that means that there are very few pediatric cancers compared to adult cancers. But on the other hand, that's just statistics, and they become meaningless when your child or a child is diagnosed. And this empathy-driven impact is important to be relayed to the general public, I think. But the thing is, if you actually delve into the statistics, it actually becomes more meaningful in terms of this gravity of pediatric cancer, right? So if you just kind of indulge me to do a little simple exercise in some math, some simple arithmetic, just to demonstrate this using real simple numbers from the National Cancer Institute and from the U.S. Census. All right, so about 26, and I'm just picking sort of the extremes here, just to give the most stark comparison. But about 26% of all cancers diagnosed in the U.S. Are in people over 75 years old, right? And less than 1% in people who are under 15. Right? And this kind of reflects that 3 to 4% number of the NIH cancer budget for pediatrics. Now, if you think of it in terms of absolute numbers, right, there's about 10,000 children under 15 who are going to be diagnosed with cancer every year, and about 500,000 seniors above 75 diagnosed with cancer every year. All right. Okay, so there's this common unit that's used in epidemiology. It's called the person year, and it helps to give an idea of the impact to a population, right? So you get that by just multiplying the number of affected people in a particular population with the number of pertinent or impacted years, right? So in this case, just for simplicity, let's just use the number of years of life between diagnosis and average life expectancy in the US, which is 81 years. Okay. So if we do that, then for seniors over 75, so in that cohort, that group, the median age is something like 80 years old, right? So that means the potential loss of for that group is a year, right? So you if you do the calculation, then that comes out to 500,000 person years, right? Whereas you do this for kids under 15, and then in that cohort, the median age is something like 8 years old. So the potential loss from cancer, if that child dies or is incapacitated from living a normal life, is about 74 years, right? So you do the math, it's 740,000 person years. Now, the actual number is probably smaller than 740,000 person years because a lot of pediatric cancer patients are cured and lead a normal life. But, it's still a better way to understand the significance of pediatric cancer. And it really says that pediatric cancer is not so minor. So I think spreading the word, the actual gravity of pediatric cancer, I think is very important. And that's one of the many things I liked about the Sunshine Project Symposium that we had earlier this year, where we had a lot of pediatric survivors as well as parents like yourselves relate their stories. And, it was especially important for me because, rarely do basic scientists go beyond the bench to even the clinic, much less meet a patient. So seeing that whole picture is extremely valuable to appreciate this gravity that I've been talking about, this gravity of the human side and together with the gravity of the numbers. And so I think wide dispersal of this kind of awareness and understanding is important to get more support really for pediatric cancer research and initiatives.
Absolutely. You're speaking to the choir with Tiffany and I. So when we also very strongly believe that, pediatric cancer is very much underfunded. And that's why it's so important to get involved with entities like NPCF and ourselves to try to fundraise some money so we can fund innovative research, because to be told that it's too innovative should never be a thing. So are there any upcoming events, fundraisers, programs that you want to highlight or encourage people to get involved with?
Well, you know what?
Besides
My son is actually finishing his first year in medical school at Vanderbilt in Asheville. And I don't know if it's a coincidence, but he somehow got involved in pediatric hem-onc and dermatology. And so far, he's really finding it worthwhile. And this summer, he'll be volunteering at a camp for kids with chronic, debilitating skin conditions. And it's called Camp Discovery.
Okay.
And it allows kids who normally really couldn't take part in any of these such typical outdoor activities because of their conditions to have the freedom and security of mind to do so, right? So forget about their problems, at least for a few days. And I think these are fantastic programs that we should all keep on our radar. Disease and fear of the future really should be the last thing on any child's mind. And just to be able to spend a few fun, carefree days is just so utterly important. And, kids as well as parents really need hope. And, if you allow me, I just like to quote one of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite movies, The Shawshank Redemption. I have two quotes that I like from that movie.
I love that movie.
But one of them is, it's, let's see, how's it go? It goes, hope is a good thing, maybe the best of things, and no good thing ever dies.
Love that.
Awesome. Very nice.
I was a bit surprised it wasn't from Star Trek, though, but
yeah. I was expecting a Star Trek reference myself, but that one was much better. I appreciate that.
Agree. I love it.
So we could listen to Dr. Kei and his amazing analogies all day, but we should probably wrap this up. So in closing, I just want to thank everybody for joining us, being a part of our conversation, especially you, Dr. Kei. Thank you so much for being on here today. If anybody listening needs support in navigating their pediatric cancer journey or would like to be a guest on our podcast, please let us know.
You can also get involved with the National Pediatric Cancer Foundation through fundraising, volunteering, promoting awareness, or contributing to pediatric cancer research. Just leave a comment or reach out to us via our contact links in the description. Until next time, keep fighting the unexpected fight.
Thank you.
Thank you.